we sort of made a camp in chapter 12, I guess you would say. It's part of the making application of what Paul has said throughout previous chapters. He's saying, because of what God has done for us, we need to be, first of all, grateful. But we also have responsibilities because he said this is what he wants us to do. So we've been looking at that. In in verse 1, rather, he says that we ought to, because of the mercy God's extended to us, we need to be living sacrifices. So, how would you explain that?
That's a tough one. I've puzzled over that a lot. I think it's, it's giving your time. It's giving your the things you have, your resources. I think the idea is just at every opportunity that you have, you do whatever you can do to further the gospel. I think that's what it means.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Along with that, I think can be just doing what God wants rather than what we want. That kind of a thing. But it goes along with what he's saying.
Yeah.
And putting him first in everything.
He's number one. He's taking care of my problem. He's given me a way that I can overcome my burden of sin, hasn't he? He's given his only begotten Son who took my place. And now I need to be grateful for what he did. And I should present myself to him as a slave, we might say. I should be a living sacrifice.
I think Paul talked also about being a bondservant.
Yeah.
It's a kind of same idea.
Yeah.
Since we're a living sacrifice, I don't think that we should do anything to harm our bodies.
No.
Like taking drugs and drinking too much, or maybe eating too much. I think we should take care of our bodies till we are a perfect sacrifice.
Yeah. And those subjects are addressed in his word. Now, I was leading into something. We're not to be like the world. We're not to conform our lives to what the world does, but we're to be transformed. Now, how do we transform ourselves? Okay. The gospel is the way that we change our lives, isn't it? But then that's not the end of the story, is it? We've got to learn how we're supposed to be instead of how we were. We need to change certain things in our lives. So then we go on to searching his word. He's not left us helpless in that, has he? He's told us what he wants us to do, what he expects of us, who we are. And as his children, he wants us to do what he said. We expect that of our children, don't we? They should listen to what I say. But I don't know how to do everything he said. So I've got to keep searching and learning what he expects of me. How are we to serve him? What's my attitude supposed to be?
Humble.
Humble. Verse 3 tells us that, doesn't it? That we should be humble. We should appreciate each other because we all don't have the same job to do we?
That's kind of what verse 4 is saying. Right?
Yeah, yeah. We all have different ability. We all have different gifts that He has given us. And that's how I look at it. Ability, which I have, it was a gift from Him. I need to use it in a certain way. And we should have the right attitude towards each other and using those. I'm not any better off than you, and you're not any better off than me in the kingdom of God, are we? But He's given us certain things that we have ability to do, and we need to apply ourselves. All right, and we're supposed to do this with zeal. In verse 9, how are we supposed to look at each other?
Genuine.
Pardon?
In verse 9, it says, let love be genuine without deceit.
Okay, but we're supposed to have love for each other. And it needs to be genuine love.
We need to put each other first.
Yes,
Put the other first.
sure. Sometimes it's not always convenient to do the things which I need to do to help you or someone else. But if I have a proper love and attitude towards you, I'll put those things before myself sometimes. How should we approach our service to God? Verse 11.
Fervently.
Fervently. What's that mean?
Passionately.
Okay.
Earnestly. With a certain amount of.
Well,
Can't think of it.
it explains it in that book, in that very verse. It says,
Okay, read it, please.
not lagging in diligence.
Okay.
That's it in a nutshell. There.
Yeah.
Not lagging in diligence, being fervent, is what he was trying to
Sure.
describe.
Verse
Not
11, mine says,
Enthusiastically. Sorry.
mine says, not slothful in business.
okay.
Anybody else say that, or
Mine
just
says slothful in
in zeal?
Yeah. Mine says.
In zeal?
In diligence.
Well, what is it to be slothful?
Maybe.
Half-heartedly.
Yeah.
Not making
Do I really have to do this?
Uh-huh.
That's not really what I like to do. But because I'm supposed to, I'll get it done.
I think we should be more enthusiastic with that.
So we need to apply ourselves.
You know.
Yeah.
We should be very able to do it.
How about those whom we count as our enemies?
Love them.
Okay.
We should bless them.
But
We need to have love for their souls.
sometimes we pick and choose who we're going to take the gospel to, don't we? Now, they won't want to hear what I have to say. You made them the choice for them rather than them choosing. Up until that point, I have a responsibility, don't I? But once I take it to them and they reject it, then whose responsibility? So I should go to them with the gospel and do my part, do what God asked of me. What did Jesus tell his disciples in Matthew 28?
You go into the whole world and preach the gospel.
How much of it?
All the world.
So it's not just a select few that I chose to take it to, is it? That's not the commandment. I'm supposed to take it to the whole world. If the world rejects it, it's not my responsibility, is it? But what is my responsibility? And we all fall short of that.
And, I think sometimes as Christians, we want to just have the only people we associate with as other Christians, which is kind of what the Amish want to do, right? They want to be, because it says be in the world, but not of the world. So I always thought the Amish dressed like, it's 1870. Well, weren't they the same as everybody else at that time?
Yeah.
I just found that weird, but we have to be out finding other people who aren't Christians and trying to talk to them. And you can't do that unless you have some sort of relationship with them.
Yes. And sometimes it's because of the circumstances in their lives which change, which causes them to need you.
Yeah.
Do we take advantage of those times? Or do we just make excuses that we're too busy and we can't do that? And I'm pointing the finger at me. I've been there. It's not what God desires of us. How do we respond to evil? Someone does something evil to us.
It says in verse 17, repay no evil for evil. Give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all.
Okay.
So, but when someone does something bad, it is the tendency of many to be angry and then to retaliate. And that is evident in the news. I mean, you see it, violence and those kinds of things that happen. It can happen at a small level, and it can happen at an explosive level that you see it and someone loses a life over it.
Somebody said once, do unto others before they do unto you.
Oh, yes.
That's what-
And sometimes we have a short fuse and our anger takes over and we do things we're not supposed to do. Anybody like that? There again. I have too short a fuse, I'll say. And somebody will do something that I consider to be wrong and maybe against me, and I look at it in the wrong way and I retaliate. Maybe it's only loud words, but what have I done? I've driven a wedge in there, haven't I?
I'm a little thing. Right?
Yeah.
It says to overcome evil with good down at the end of the chapter.
Yeah. So we're going to respond to it in a better way there. Overcoming evil by responding with good, verses 20 and 21.
And that word abhor means extreme hate. Extreme hate
Yeah.
to evil.
I can have a proper attitude towards evil, but how about the person?
The other person, you just don't like their deeds.
I think that's what verse 19 is saying. He says, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. I guess we're supposed to leave that part in God's hands.
Yeah.
Then verse 10, he goes on to tell us how we should treat our enemy,
Okay.
which would be very hard.
Yeah. Someone has done something evil against us. Do we apply Verse 20. If he's hungry, feed him. Thirsty, give him a drink. That kind of,
Because that keeps coals of fire on his head.
yeah.
It says. And it doesn't that, I mean, that's the truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
This goes with what Jesus spoke about in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, about
Yeah.
loving your enemies.
Yeah. So if you're going to sum up chapter 12, what would you say?
Put God first, put other men second, and you do what's right.
Apply what God has said. I need instruction in that. I can go to His Word. He's told me, hasn't He? Problem is, a lot of times we go to our brain, what's in it, and we apply that before we listen to what God has said about it.
Sometimes our mouth takes over and it just goes before we do anything else. I know.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions or comments about anything we've covered so far in chapter 12? It's talking about our responsibility, isn't it? Since God has given us a way in which we can be redeemed, I should be grateful. And there's certain things, certain ways that He expects for me to walk, what to do. I don't always get it right, do I? So then we've got to ask for forgiveness again, don't we? And we do have a way of making those things right once we have accepted the gospel. He has a plan for that, doesn't He? For us having forgiveness of our sins that we can commit afterward. Okay, so see if I can get this thing to cooperate here. I think we've maybe covered this enough. Get down into chapter 13, which is all right. In the beginning of this outline, it says, continuing his instructions concerning the transformed life. And that's what we're supposed to have now. After we've obeyed the gospel, we're supposed to have a transformed life. Paul now discusses the Christian's responsibility to governmental authority. Understanding that all governments are in power due to the providence of God, and that they serve as ministers of God to avenge the evildoer, Christians are admonished to submit to the powers that be. And part of this submission involves payment of taxes and having respect for those who are in office. And sometimes they make that very difficult, don't they?
Oh, yes.
But nevertheless, did God not say that that is the way we're supposed to do it? They're there for a reason. Do I always submit to what they demand of me?
That's a tough thing, man.
Yes.
Because you deal with these things where the government does things that's against the law. I mean, there's lots of things you go through the Constitution and say, yeah, we got laws against the original law.
But there's also a process for doing that. And we've got to follow those processes to change that. Can I be active in making changes?
You can.
And should be, I think. But I am also to submit myself to the law of the land. That's what Paul's saying. Go ahead.
You know, in part, because I have like a little notation I must have made from another study, and it says, you know, this is still in the Bible, but until it goes against what God tells us to do.
Okay,
And some of that's coming out.
sure.
There's things against what God tells us to not harm ourselves and to do things that are against, you know, killing children. And there's all kinds of things. Until the law is going against God's law,
Yeah.
God's law is still supreme over the government.
And do we have an example of that in the New Testament?
Yeah,
Okay,
I always think about, you know, Peter before the Sanhedrin, you know, they're saying, do not say these things. And he went right out and did what he was doing before.
yeah. So we can go to Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 5 and see the response of Peter and John.
But it's like, like example of gay marriage is a good one. Yeah, you can have a gay marriage, but it ain't right. It's against God's law.
Yeah.
God defined what marriage was. Man didn't.
Yeah.
But now we're redefining it. And I believe in my lifetime, you're going to see where people can get married to their dog. It sounds funny, but where do we stop? Where do you stop? You keep going along this line of reasoning where we're going now. And worse things than that.
Well, there are many things that are happening in our society right now that are wrong. And they are wrong because God said so. As a Christian, I cannot participate in those things. I must take the same attitude that Peter and John took. And I still need to be a citizen of this country, obeying the laws that apply to me, though. Is it right for me to dodge my taxes? No. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Unto God the things that are God's. So.
And I've been guilty of that in my life.
Yeah.
You know.
We all don't want to submit to that, but to a point. But this is saying I need to take care of that in the right way. Now there are.
And this is before I met Joey. For the past 18 or 20 years, I've had her straightened out.
Oh, yes. But it does say in verses 1 and 2 that God appointed governments to be over people for a reason. What would it be without law and order?
Well, you just look back at the example of the Old West, when this country was first founded. When there was no law and order, it was a real mess.
Well,
I think we're becoming the Wild West again.
Well,
This happens all over this country. So that's kind of a,
yeah. But there's a government there for a reason. That's what Paul says. I need to submit to it to a point. If they're telling me that I must do something that's contrary to God's will, I've got to choose God's will. But they are there, well, I used to think as a youth, to keep law and order. I'm seeing some things that are happening that it's not very much that way. But
That was the original intent. Keep law and order. You know.
it should. Who should it apply to?
Everyone.
Is it being applied to everyone?
No.
That's where the problem is coming in this country right now. People are doing things that are unlawful and not being held accountable.
I mean, the government, our own government, totally goes against its own laws and does stuff that just drives you crazy. Because you don't have to dig very far to find it either. Go to the border, see what's going on. It's,
But we better be careful what our attitude is.
yep,
I have a problem sometimes just writing off certain individuals because of their actions. What are we supposed to do for our enemies?
supposed to love them.
Pray for them, bless
Yeah.
them.
I can do things to help change things in this country, can, but I better be careful how I do that. I better apply God's principles to it rather than Jim's. So we're supposed to pay our taxes and we're supposed to fear and respect and honor those who are in office. But I can't put them before God. So careful how you weigh this out here. I have responsibility, don't I? So I need to work on that. At the beginning of verse 8, what's he say there?
Owe no one anything but love, basically. That's
Okay.
a rough paraphrase, I guess.
So we're supposed to take care of our obligations, aren't we?
We can't borrow money.
That's not what it said.
Not what it says.
Not what it said. You made an agreement there, didn't you? So you're supposed to follow that.
Mine also says to seek the best for one another, to seek the best for each other.
By doing that, then we fulfill the law of God, don't we? Then in verse 9, he talks about other commandments which God has put forth. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit murder. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. If there's any other commandment, they're all summed up in the saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So my attitude should be trained or guarded by love, which I have for others.
What's interesting is when you look at all the commandments,
Yeah,
it all boils down to two ideas. You're supposed to love God, and you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. And every commandment God gave is just a commentary on those two laws.
and Jesus said that that was the first.
And the greatest law.
Yeah. So I better be careful, hadn't I? Because he's given us a remedy. He's given us rules to abide by. And my problem is listening or applying what he said. Any other comments about anything that we've looked at thus far?
You know, all these things that we're studying here about our responsibilities to the government. You know, that should be a two-way street. But is it?
Well, exactly. Do I have to like everything the government is doing? No, as long as it conforms to what God has said, yes. When they go against God's law, then I need to do what I can to change that. Are we active in trying to change those things?
Probably not enough.
Well, I know I fall short, but I try. And that's not to exalt myself in that, but I feel a responsibility to do that. Sometimes I go beyond where I should go with that because of the temper that I have. But I feel, I hate to see what's happening.
When you think about what happened, under Nero,
Yes.
and under Caligula, and, there are lots of Christians that went against the law because it was right. It was right in God's eyes to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't bow down to those perverse things that were going on.
Right.
And in some ways, we're still dealing with the same types of things.
And I'm not going to do those evil things which some of them are doing right now. It's just so I can resist the devil in that way. But I should have a proper attitude for the government because God ordained governments, didn't he? For a purpose. Doesn't mean they're always just and right in what they do and say. Anyone else before we close? We're going to stop here. We'll chew this some more next week. Thank you.